So the first thing I want to do is really explain and articulate why we need particular strategies for the SAT and show that it's really just not enough to be a very, very good reader or a very good critical thinker. That critical thinking is, of course, the cornerstone of the reading passage and even of the writing, the essay section, but it's extremely important to understand strategic moves that the test writers use to keep even the smartest test takers off balance and keep them missing questions. I always use examples of colleagues of mine that have written full-length books and are brilliant in their field. And even if they take certain versions of the SAT, there will be certain question types that they'll miss. Not because they aren't brilliant or because they're not smart enough to get the question right, but because the question is preying on particular weaknesses that unless you're aware of those types of weaknesses, you're not going to see them coming, and you're not going to be vigilant enough to sidestep the weakness. So let's see here. The first strategy that is important is accepting the imperfect correct answer. I wanted to start with this question that is pretty fascinating, that I actually love Edgar Allan Poe, and he was part of the work that I did in graduate school while I was getting my PhD. And they use a Poe passage as the basis for the 10 questions, I think it was, that they ask about it. And question number 3, I am 100% positive that all of these 4 answer choices are none of them are a faithful representation of the meaning of these particular lines in the passage. And I wanted to start with this question type 2, because we don't really need a lot of context from the passage itself. So I'm just going to read the lines for us. You don't really need to know what's going on. The overall arc of this passage is describing a friendship and why this particular guy living in Paris, France, strikes up a friendship with this other sort of eccentric kind of reclusive personality. So it starts with line, we saw. That's the important beginning here. We saw each other again and again. I was deeply interested in the little family history which he detailed to me. That's a pretty easy phrase to understand, that the narrator just has some sort of fascination with his familial background. But this is the part that the question is really asking us about. If we actually look at the question, the narrator uses the phrase, whenever mere self is his theme, in line 20, to refer to what? So let me read the whole sentence together. I was deeply interested in the little family history which he detailed to me with all that candor which a Frenchman indulges whenever mere self is his theme. And I was working with a student the other day who was at a complete loss just for even the literal dictionary definition of what this sentence was really about. And what I am certain is going on here that none of these answer choices actually get to. That's why if you look at the title of the slide, these 4 answers are all relatively wrong. And the goal for this question then is that we have to pick the least wrong answer, that there is no right answer, because the real right answer for this situation is that Poe was making a joke about French people. And what he is saying here is that French people tend to lack honesty when they talk about themselves. It's supposed to be funny. And it's not even that they lack candor or lack honesty, but the phrase mere self is sort of like a joke that usually they're going to exaggerate and aggrandize themselves when they are talking about themselves. And let me read these answer choices. So that's the essential pith of what is happening in this line. And none of the answer choices account for this. They don't account for the humor or the joke. And I don't know, maybe the test taker didn't get the joke because Poe is a hard writer, and sometimes people, even important people, miss things. So question, the letter choice A is a situation that is of special interest to people of a certain nationality. B is the humility that can result from frequently discussing oneself. C is a longer work that concerns the narrator's life and family. And D is the narrator's extensive knowledge of different types of people. Let's look at B, because B is one of the most interesting parts of the answer choices. B makes me feel like the writers did get the joke, because they're saying the humility that can result, and what their mere self is obviously like, it's not literal humility, and that's where the joke comes in, is that this is not actual humility, and that's why letter B is absolutely incorrect, and that you can be absolutely certain that the fact that they're including humility and discussing oneself, we know that that's wrong because of the sarcasm and the tone about mere self. That's what's so fascinating, though, is that the fact, I was making my little joke earlier, but the fact that they have letter choice B more or less proves that they do know that the correct answer should be that the lack of humility is what Poe was getting at here, is the lack of humility, the lack of honesty when the Frenchman is talking about himself, and that's his theme. And so that is the implied correct answer. But as you can see, A, C, and D, none of them talk about that. None of them refer to the lack of humility, which is really what the essential meaning of this line is about. So most of my students, when they see this question, they can notice that C is the easiest. If you've read the passage, C is pretty easy to knock off the answer choices in terms of being correct. A longer work that concerns the narrator's life and family, there's never any details or any hints that C might be correct. D is a little bit trickier, the narrator's extensive knowledge of different types of people, because the only thing that you need to notice is that it's different types when we only have one type here, and we're only talking about the Frenchman. And so this answer D actually is the most tricky compared to A, and sounds the most maybe similar to what we need and what the narrator's purpose is, that he is explaining or broadcasting his extensive knowledge of a certain type of person, but not different types. So that's how you can be 100% sure that D is wrong. So if A and D are the most confusing answer choices, then this is what I tell my students. You can only be 100% sure that D is wrong, but you cannot be 100% sure that A is right. And so this strategy, like I said on the previous slide, and this is particularly difficult for students that are very advanced and are already doing well on the test, that they will particularly get questions like this wrong because they're looking for the right answer. And of course, we always want the right answer, but there are times when they literally build in imperfect correct choices that are very difficult for people to get past, especially in terms of timing and pacing. A lot of people will literally become frozen on questions like this and lose a lot of time because they know that none of the answer choices are a perfect fit. Letter A is the correct answer. Correct, let's put that in scare quotes. If you read, let's read letter A again. A situation that is of special interest to people of a certain nationality. The most peculiar thing about that answer choice is the word choice and the language of a situation. That to me is a complete misrepresentation of what this line is really about. And the situation here that would be of interest to French people is of their tendency to exaggerate and lack honesty. I don't know what you guys think, but that's not really a situation. That's more of a characteristic. And so building in that inaccurate language into the correct letter choice completely throws people for a loop. And this is a question type that most students will get wrong. It's very rare for people to get a question type with mostly wrong answer choices right. Even if the student gets this one right though, I want to talk about this really important observation that if you really study the SAT and know it well, there is a repeating pattern where mostly wrong questions like the one I just showed you are often followed by mostly right question types. And so they come back to back. And I'm going to explain in a minute why they do this, because there's a particular reason that they do this to throw all the students off. So let me walk you through this next question. So what happens, my student Lillian the other day, we talked about this. When she was on question number 3, she told me she was stuck, she was wasting time, she was stressing about it, she was getting tired, and it was having an effect on her. So that's the kind of mind state that you're in after a question like number 3. And then they come swooping in here with a question like question 4, which is like the inverse of question 3, because 3 out of the 4 answer choices are all essentially true. And as you can see, like, you know, off to the right, I'm saying like A, B, and C, they're all essentially true. The only letter choice, let me read the question for us. The passage indicates that the narrator was most strongly drawn to Dupin because he was what? D, lucky to make a wealthy acquaintance, is the only choice out of these 4 that is factually incorrect and that most students will easily knock letter D off. But this is the problem, is that as soon as they knock letter D off, they're presented with the opposite problem compared to question 3. And that's that A, B, and C are all fundamentally accurate, like with regard to the passage. Let me show you, they're not even just slightly accurate, but if you look at the evidence, they are perfectly on point. So let's look at letter choice A. So the letter choice A is saying that the narrator is strongly drawn to Dupin because he was interested in Dupin's life and lineage. And then this is always, this question type is a pair, right? So questions 4 and 5. 5 is asking the test taker which evidence from the passage supports the answer to question number 4. And so I wanted to walk us through these two questions together so that everyone could get a look at this evidence and see how perfect this evidence really is. So if you pick letter choice A for 4, interested in Dupin's life and lineage, let's look at the lines 18 to 20 that they give us in C for number 5. And they're off to the right here that I highlighted in yellow. And I'll start here. I was deeply interested in little family history, which he detailed to me. That is absolutely a faithful piece of evidence that ties in with interested in Dupin's life and lineage. If you haven't even read the passage, you can see that those two, they fit perfectly. There is nothing wrong. There is not even a slight connotation or any kind of imprecision that he's saying, I was deeply interested in his family history, and A is saying he was interested in Dupin's life and lineage. The fact that A is first in the letter choices of A, B, C, and D is extremely important, and I'll come back to that in a second. But it's not an accident that they put A first, and so keep that in mind as we keep walking forward here. Let's look at letter choice C, that the narrator is most strongly drawn to Dupin because he was amazed that they both had the same interests. And then for 5, they give you lines 14 to 17 off to the right here. Let me read those for us. Our first meeting was in an obscure library in the Rue Montmartre, where the accident of our both being in search of the very same rare and very remarkable volume brought us into closer communion. He's literally saying they are searching for the same exact book, that they had the same type of reading habits, which is a perfect sort of piece of evidence to talk about that they share the same interests. And he is amazed by it. If you look, there's word choices in the passage like remarkable that sort of are perfectly synonymous with amazed. And so now we don't even just have A, but we have C lining up perfectly here with as an evidence, a piece of evidence for letter C. Let's look at B now. So A and C really are on the nose. They seem like perfect choices for this question. Let's look at letter choice B now. The narrator is most strongly drawn to Dupin because he was excited by the nature of Dupin's virtues. Then the corresponding piece of evidence for question number 5. This is the lines off to the right here. I'll start with 21 to 23. I was astonished. I was astonished too at the vast extent of his reading, and above all, I felt my soul enkindled within me by the wild fervor and the vivid freshness of his imagination. And so we definitely see excitement, which I highlighted in yellow. You can see the excitement. That's easy to see. Soul enkindled within me, wild fervor. It's all excitement language. This one still seems right because of that, but there is a word choice built in to B and 4 that is a very weak and misleading representation of imagination. That he's excited by the nature of Dupin's imagination. To refer to imagination as a virtue sounds incorrect. It's a very, if you look up virtue, that when we think of virtue, the connotation is about morality. And there is nothing in this entire passage about moral choices or moral characteristics. And so they built in a imprecise word choice into letter B that would make a test taker feel like this can't be the correct answer. But in fact, it is. B is the correct answer. Even though A and C, they sound perfect. And we saw with the evidence, they essentially are perfect. And then with the correct answer choice, they build in a misleading and very confusing, odd use of the word virtue to make you feel like that couldn't possibly be the correct answer, which it is. But what's the technicality here, right? So how can I explain to you guys now that B is correct? And I did that on this slide with the red. And so this is how you find your way to the answer, to letter B. So the least perfect sounding choice that's correct out of the 3 true statements, it's because in the question itself, they ask for most, and there is one phrase for letter choice B, and then for the evidence for question 5, is that in lines 21 to 23, he uses, the author uses the phrase above all. That is the only way you can find out that B is the correct answer. And as you can see, they even signal to the test taker by virtue that this isn't the right answer. And they make A and C sound even better, but then they build in the technicality to most and then corresponding to above all in the passage. That's the only way you can figure this out. So that's kind of a tedious question to walk through, but it's fascinating, right? That this pattern of the mostly wrong, mostly right is extremely important to be aware of, because like I said earlier, when you go through a question like question 3, you're fatigued, there's no right answer, you're slowing down. And remember when I said a little bit earlier, it was important that letter choice A sounds so perfect, because I asked my students this week when I was working with them, as soon as they go through the mostly wrong question and they get to see letter choice A and it's perfect, and there's a perfect correspondence between the evidence in question 5 and the letter choice A, they stop. They won't continue reading. And so, and the test writers know this, that as soon as they fatigue them with the mostly wrong question, they are gonna swoop in and feed you a mostly right question. And so you're followed by this false confidence. These 2 questions, if you look at the order, like even question 4 and question 5, they feel like a breath of fresh air, because the one previously really is so exhausting to deal with that there's something, it's almost like a relief. Like when you start to get questions like this, and it exudes and it induces this very false confidence. And so most people will pick A or pick C because the evidence works too for question 5. And so this pattern is very tricky and very deceptive. And so I feel like that was just one of the key observations I wanted to set up the main idea of my lecture for you guys today, is that in this moment, they're not really testing your comprehension skills, your critical thinking skills, that even though critical thinking is of course always involved, they are really testing and kind of relying on a kind of a weakness of strategy. And that's why we need a strategy to counteract it. I always tell my students when they encounter a mostly wrong question type, they have got to be very vigilant on the next question right after it, because it's usually much easier. So like for this slide, like this is the key takeaway message for today, is that since the SAT writers are using these strategies, it requires a strategic response. It's not enough to just say, I'm gonna become a great critical reader, or I'm gonna work on my rhetorical knowledge base. You have got to have a strategic response to cope with these strategic chess moves that they're making, like all throughout the test. To reinforce this and actually build this back to some neuroscience in the brain itself, I know that sounds a little heavy, but I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the primacy and recency effects, but it's something that psychologists and neurobiologists use to talk about the phenomenon of what we remember and what we don't. And I wanted to point this out to just show everyone and reinforce that the test writers are very aware of issues like this and with people. And so my key takeaway from this question, we're not going to analyze the passage itself, but I just wanted to show you and reinforce that there is almost a kind of dishonest underpinning to how they frame question types like this, because they know about the primacy and recency effects. The primacy and recency effects, in short, just refer to how we remember something like a passage or any larger piece of information. And so the recency effect is about remembering what's at the end. And so you tend to remember, you know, the last paragraph, the last sentence of a passage. Whereas the primacy effect is that we tend to remember beginnings really well. And so if you look at question 21, take a quick sip of water. If you look at question 21, it's a central claim question. The central claim of the passage is that what? I highlighted A, B, and D because all 3 of those answer choices are feeding into primacy and recency effects. A is about the beginning, and B and D are about the ending. and C is the correct answer. So you can see that they know everyone is going to be most tempted because of this. It's a literal fact of how your brain works and how your brain stores language, memory, and knowledge when you're trying to learn. And so they're very aware of A, B, and D. It's going to be the most tempting answers for your brain. But of course, C is the correct answer. And so the fact that this is the key takeaway is that they're exploiting a natural memory function. They're not just testing comprehension here. And so I always tell my students as a strategy to make sure that they're careful on central claim type questions is that they need to be very vigilant about answer choices that correspond to the extremes in the passage. And that oftentimes those are planted there because for your brain, they will feel most right when oftentimes, like you can see, all three of the wrong answers are feeding into that feeling that your brain will be most comfortable with those three answer choices. What's great about these strategies though, and once you see this, and once I lecture with my students about something like primacy and recency effects, it changes you permanently. Like you never see the question type the same way again. And that's what's so important while you're practicing. And I know so many of you out there are gonna practice really hard and try really hard. But I always say that not all practice is created equal. Some practice is much more effective and it will improve your score much quicker. It's not if you just keep practicing and just keep trying. Sadly, like that's not always going to give you the result that you need. You need a certain type of practice and it needs to be bolstered and supported by certain types of knowledge. And so that's like when we talk about, when I talk about primacy and recency effects with my students, this is a kind of thing for building strategies that are better practice, more efficient practice, and more insightful practice. So that's the goal that we always have here. Let's pivot to strategy number 2 about knowing when to choose precision in your reading over impressions of your reading, because this is very tricky because there are a lot of question types that require you to think about overall impressions. And so when you're in the testing moment, you are often being asked and pushed to think in terms of overall impressions. And so the test writers know that. And so as a way to throw people off, they will then ask questions that if you rely on impression, you will get the wrong answer. And so they ask you to consider overall impression over and over again. And then they will feed you a question that if you rely on that same type of thinking and same type of reading, you'll go and you'll have a misstep and pick the wrong answer. So let's look at question number 17. This is from a different passage than the Edgar Allan Poe passage we were looking at before. The author of passage 1 would most likely attribute the popularity of new technologies to A, economic prosperity, B, spiritual decline, C, great convenience, and D, alluring advertising. So we can see here with this question, the overall focus of this whole passage was just about adoption of different technologies and devices and what kind of effect is this having on culture. So that was the basic overall thrust of the passage. And I highlighted in yellow the impression that all of my students are left with after they read this passage. There are lines and sentences everywhere that correspond to letter choice C. Even speaking of the primacy and recency effects, look at the first line. They are already priming the reader to think about convenience and to see this entire passage through the lens of convenience. So can you imagine going a full day without using technology? Few of us can. Take away our cell phone and we all freak out. So they are literally rhetorically framing this passage through convenience itself. And then they reinforce that framing and I could have probably highlighted even more. It's like I didn't want to junk up the slide too much. But if you look at line 7, more yellow, the way we communicate, it helps the way we gather information, the way we prepare our food, it's more efficient and better. And then there is a literal talk of convenience in line 21 to 22. So you can see the yellow there too. All of this yellow material in the passage is reinforcing C, which is the wrong answer here. We don't want great convenience as the answer, even though there is so much material that seems to be supporting letter C. This is why we have to shift from impression to precision. And so the actual answer here is D. And the only way you will resist the temptation of the overall impression is if you really use a precise type of reading and thinking that actually discounts what you know from the rest of the passage. And so if you look at the blue is much less direct. And this is why you have to almost put on a different type of reading hat to let the blue shape you to letter choice D. That whole paragraph around line 15 in the blue, they're talking about the lag time between when a technology is first invented to when it is adopted widely. And so like the line here is that personal computers were created in the 1970s, but they did not command a mass market until the 1990s. What the author is doing here is implying that it's not until advertising enters the picture and creates a widespread awareness of a product that's when the product becomes like it reaches its mass market. It's then adopted widely. That the fact that the computer was made in the 70s and the fact that it takes such a long time until we all start using it, it's not about the convenience itself anymore. It is because if it were that driving it, then why wouldn't everyone just say, oh, it's so convenient, and everyone starts using it immediately? There is an X factor here, and the X factor is advertising. And you can see this too in lines 19 to 20. Let me read this. This is really important as well. Each of these pieces of technology has been successfully marketed in the same way. This product will help meet your needs and make your life easier. So this is the subtlety and the precision we need, is that the author is not just talking about convenience, but how convenience is itself a kind of fiction created by marketing departments and by people who work in marketing and advertising. And so even letter choice D talks about this allure, that they are literally talking about not convenience itself, but the idea of convenience is something that seduces us into wanting to buy into a certain type of product. And so this is an example of the precision type of reading that you absolutely need, that is a little bit harder to do than overall impression type reading, which will feed us into letter choice C, and we'll get the wrong answer. So that is a great example of that strategy of needing precision and using precision and knowing when to resist impression, which can be, like I said, that can be hard because oftentimes it's required for you to rely on impression. Strategy number 3, this is really important too, using answer choice keywords effectively. There are times where there is a single word in an answer choice that is crucial and fundamental. And if you gloss over even that single word, you are highly likely to get the whole question wrong. So we're going to shift a little bit to another passage here. This passage, I can give you some really simple context. It was a married couple walking in a park, and the man is sort of walking away from his wife and is sort of reflecting on his first girlfriend, which I'm sure was not pleasant for the wife. So it's kind of a strange passage that the husband is having this sort of reflection and rumination on time past. So let me read just a few lines to give us some footing here. So I'll start at the top of the image on the right, line 33. 15 years ago, I came here with Lily, he thought. We sat somewhere over there by the lake, and I begged her to marry me all throughout the hot afternoon. How the dragonfly kept circling us. How clearly I could see the dragonfly and her shoe with the square silver buckle at the toe. All the time I spoke, I saw her shoe, and when it moved impatiently, I knew without looking up what she was going to say. The whole of her seemed to be in her shoe. It's a funny line. And my love, my desire were in the dragonfly. For some reason, I thought if it settled there, on that leaf, the broad one with the red flower in the middle of it, if the dragonfly settled on the leaf, she would say yes at once. But the dragonfly went round and round. It never settled anywhere. Of course not, happily not, or I shouldn't be walking here with Eleanor and the children. So that's the relevant part of the passage that we need to answer question 6. Question 6, in the passage, the dragonfly serves to what? So the question is asking us to isolate this particular detail about the dragonfly and what kind of rhetorical purpose is the dragonfly serving in the passage itself. Most of my students right away, and I think everyone listening to me now, B and D are pretty clearly incorrect. B suggests that the creatures in the park are engaged in its visitors' personal lives makes no sense. The idea that the dragonfly is somehow intimately involved with relationship decision-making doesn't make much sense. D, provide imagery to show how the gardens were once arranged. Even if you had read the whole passage, there is not a single detail about garden arrangement. So B and D, pretty easy to knock those two off. But there is a real problem here between A and C. And most of my students really waffle and get very confused and waste way too much time thinking about A and C. And I can actually show you why pretty quickly and easily, why C is wrong and A is right, but why people get so confused and fixated on letter choice C. So C is display the man's somewhat frantic demeanor during his proposal to Lily. And if I hadn't highlighted and annotated this passage, most of you would probably feel like this is a faithful answer, choice, or representation of what's going on during this man's proposal. And this is why. If you look at the red here of somewhat frantic, there is somewhat frantic type language that corresponds to that phrase threaded all the way through the passage. If you look at begging, if you look at the dragonfly is circling, the foot is moving impatiently, and then again going round and around and never settling, that corresponds in meaning and in connotation perfectly to somewhat frantic. That is exactly what that language in the passage is reinforcing. And so that's why most people will slip and they will absolutely choose C, because they feel like all of that language is shaping them toward that answer. But what, like I said, this key strategy here is isolating keywords and answer choices that will, if you focus on that one keyword, the question goes from being like a conundrum that it feels like a puzzle you can't fix to like something super easy. That's one of the best teaching moments. And I even had a few of those this week where a question that feels like a sort of intellectual burden that even smart students just are struggling between two answer choices. With the right lens on the answer, it becomes much simpler and much easier. And the way to do that with C is through demeanor. Most of us have a working knowledge of the word demeanor. We feel comfortable with demeanor, but there are shades of meaning in demeanor as a definition that are really crucial for knowing that C is wrong. And that is basically that demeanor is about outward comportment and what is visible behavior. And so if we look at the yellow that I highlighted in the passage in line 34, you can see what the demeanor is here. And it is not frantic at all. And in C, they're saying that he has a frantic demeanor. But in yellow, we can see we sat over by the lake. That is all we know about his demeanor in this moment, is that they are physically sitting still together on a bench by a lake. That's the demeanor. It's definitely not frantic, even though there is frantic language all built through the passage. That frantic language does not describe his outward comportment. It's not the demeanor. It's more of the emotional content and the thoughts and the feeling of what's going on, but it doesn't describe demeanor at all. So if you zero in on demeanor, it fixes the problem so easily, and then you can choose A. And I would say too, if we read A, which is the correct answer choice, indicate that Lily did not reciprocate the man's feelings. This is a great example of when the right answer, they will give you reasons to feel like it's still incorrect. And one of the main things that I wanted to show everyone right now is that right here, they're linking the dragonfly to the lack of reciprocation. But if you look back to the paragraph, they do that twice. And they do that even first, and most importantly, with her shoe, with the fact that when he's about to ask her, the foot in the shoe is shaking, and that shaking shows him and tells him she's going to say no and she's not going to reciprocate. And so the fact that they do that with the shoe as a detail and then ask about the dragonfly, it will often make people skip over A, because they'll associate the lack of reciprocation with a different detail that comes first. It's not until line 44, if the dragonfly settled on the leaf, she would say yes at once. It's not until then that we get the dragonfly is serving a rhetorical purpose to talk about reciprocation. And so they give it to us first with the shoe, which is like, it's a distraction. It's a distracting detail. And then they ask about the dragonfly and we get that later. So that is a key example of isolating demeanor and using those keywords and answer choices to really, really get us in the right direction. Let me reinforce this for everybody one more time to show how this same exact strategy operates in a completely different passage. And if you look at questions 5 and 6 here, it's a pretty simple setup of this passage. There is a man going to a baseball game with his son, and he runs into some old friend of his that he grew up with together. They went to school together, and the one man was a baseball player, and then the other guy is sort of an intellectual author type person. And so question number 5 asks this: a meaningful irony in the passage is that while the narrator had admired the young Swede, the Swede is the baseball player, the young Swede's accomplishments, the Swede, B, appreciated the narrator's accomplishments as an adult. B is the correct answer. So I'm not going to waste time walking us through the A, B, C, and D of this particular question because we really don't need to reinforce the strategy. But we can see appreciated the narrator's accomplishments as an adult. That is correct. And that the Swede absolutely, if you look at line 35, that is the piece of evidence that really shapes us to letter choice B, that it's the guy who wrote the books. The Swede said to the boy, the guy who wrote the books, Nathan Zuckerman. And so the books is the key detail to talk about. The Swede is aware of this man's accomplishments, and the fact that he's aware of it, we can talk about how he appreciates it. And there are other lines in the passage that reinforce appreciation of letter choice B and of the accomplishments. The key part of this strategy and using a keyword in the answer choices to shape you to the right answer is about, if we look at question 6 here, which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? We need the keyword in B of adult. And if you don't focus on adult in the letter choice B, you will absolutely get 6 wrong. And most of my students, this is one of the harder questions, because I put in red accomplishments, most of them pick C. We don't even have to go through the entire line of 53, but if you can even see just in the answer choice, the you bet Skip. Skip is the nickname that is given to the narrator because of his accomplishments and because of his skipping grades as a child. And so accomplishments in B corresponds perfectly to his nickname in letter choice C. But that's incorrect, because as an adult, and adult is the key word here, Skip was his accomplishments as a child. His skipping grades as a child is what allowed him to sort of accomplish so much. And so if you discount the keyword adult, you will get this wrong and you'll pick C. As soon as you account for just that one single focus of adult, you absolutely then switch to B, because the books in line 37, the books are what he did do as an adult. And as you can see in B, it's lines 35 to 39, which is where I highlighted the yellow. So you really do need the keyword adult here in the same exact way that you need to focus on demeanor in this previous slide. Same exact operation, using these keyword answer choices to shape you toward the correct answer. And that oftentimes it really does boil down to just one single word, which is, these questions were deceptively difficult, but then there's a kind of ease that comes like when you start using the right tools and the right strategy. I think I've got a few more strategies here. There's many strategies that we teach that we use to help people, and there's no way I could cover all of these in the open class. I think I want to skip to strategy number 5 and go over strategy number 4 because it's a little bit more compact and we still need to do the Q&A, and I want to get to questions. So let me talk about strategy number 5 briefly. Choosing the proximally correct answer. This is extremely important. I'll give you some quick context here. This passage was about an engagement, and this man and woman who just became engaged go to a party with the woman's mother, and there is the man, not surprisingly, is having some friction with the woman's mom and is not happy with the party. He doesn't like the people at the party. He feels like he is different from them, and there's some social friction going on between the man and the company, and then it becomes a family friction as it translates to him and his soon-to-be mother-in-law. So that's the background for the passage. This is the key thing that I want to show you about reading and answering for the proximal right answer, not from what we know from other parts of the passage. Oftentimes things that are very true and very correct from the passage as a whole can shape you and get you the wrong answer. So let's look at number 8. Cecil brings up fences lines 79 to 81 in order to what? We don't need to read 79 to 81 yet. I want to show you letter choice C. Demand greater respect for his desire for privacy and seclusion. Look at off to the right of the slide line 45. This is Cecil, and this is his feeling. But my point is that their whole attitude is wrong. An engagement, horrid word in the first place, is a private matter and should be treated as such. So number 8, giving you C, you see that there is evidence for this. It's perfect evidence. It is absolutely true that he has a desire for privacy and seclusion, that is in no way incorrect. That's why most people choose C. The correct choice is A. The only way to get to A is to read proximally for the correct answer. And when I say that, it's like you're reading locally. You need to make sure when they give you line references like 79 to 81, that you're focusing narrowly on that selection. If you, just to reinforce this is line 45 about the privacy. So this is much earlier in the passage, it's further away. And so even though it's true, even though it's correct, it's from a different part of the passage, and you have to make sure that you're making that distinction, that even though it is true and even though it is correct, what they're doing is asking about a particular rhetorical part, and so your knowledge of the whole is going to hurt you. They use your knowledge, your correct knowledge even, to use that against you. Let me quickly reread line 70. I know someone just raised their hand, and we're gonna do questions right here in a second. So I'll make sure we get to our questions really soon. So let's reread these 10 lines. They're not even full lines, so this will go quick. Well, said he, I cannot help it if they do disapprove of me. There are certain irremovable barriers between myself and them. I must accept them. We all have our limitations, I suppose, I said, wise Lucy. Sometimes they're forced on us, though, said Cecil, who saw from her remark that she did not quite understand his position. How? It makes a difference, doesn't it, whether we fully fence ourselves in or whether we're fenced out by the barriers of others. If you look at my yellow highlights here, disapproval, barriers between myself and them, and even difference, it makes a difference. Look at how that yellow highlight corresponds to A. Highlight the feeling that he's different from others in the community. Seems easy with the annotation and comparing letter choice A to this sort of note-taking and this highlighting on this image of the passage. But I can tell you that when students are in this moment, choosing between A and C, it feels like a very authentic dilemma. Like they feel very uncertain about how to make a decision when C is true. It's very hard. And the answer is this, it's the strategy. You have to choose the proximally correct answer. Privacy was too far away in the passage itself. It was too soon. They want the answer choice that's right there in 79 to 81. So that is strategy number 5. Let's switch to the questions, and we can have the open forum and do questions in person. But I had some questions fed to me right before the session. I know people have been asking, so I wanted to cover some of those quickly too. Someone said, when should the students start preparing, and that the students in grade 8, and my answer is today or maybe tomorrow, depending on what time zone you're in. But that is and I'm smiling, but it's not a facetious answer. And I wanted to tell everyone this quick story. I also lecture at the University of California, Irvine, in addition to working with 7EDU. And I see so many and hear so many really fascinating stories from my students about their relationship to standardized testing and how it affects their education and where they're at in their trajectory. And one of my students, Lucas Wang, talked about, he has 2 brothers, so it's a family with 3 brothers. Lucas is a very, very brilliant student, and he's actually transferring from UCI to Cornell this coming year, so he's making that jump from a top school to now he's going to be in Cornell Medical. And so we all know what that is going to do for his career and for his life. It's really special. But he's the oldest son. And the first son, when I say start today and he's in grade 8, his brother is in middle school right now. I think he's even younger than that. I think he is in grade 7. And his brother just got enrolled and sort of admitted into this Johns Hopkins gifted program for gifted children and in middle school. And it's because of his grade on the SAT. His father started letting them practice just once a week. Like Lucas even said, consistency is key. It wasn't like they were sort of, that's all they thought about was the SAT, but it was a consistent feature of their routine. And they built it into the routine. And now this kid in middle school is going to be associated and is enrolled in a Johns Hopkins gifted program, which is going to completely shape everything else about what happens to him in college and what happens to, you know, his career options and opportunities. And so starting today is not, I don't think, that advice. And I think it's very apt. And if you hear a story like that, the funny thing too is that Lucas, and I believe Lucas because I had him for 2 classes, so I knew him for an extended period of time, and I got to see him work and watch what he was doing. And he would joke with me that he was smarter than his brother, and the brother who's enrolled in the Johns Hopkins gifted program. And he said, "I'm certain I'm smarter than him." So maybe his ego, I don't know, but he said that the brother agreed even, and that it was just the fact that the brother had started sooner. And that Lucas, even, you know, because you learn as a parent and you change your strategies, Lucas had started later with his SAT prep. And he still had a pretty strong outcome, but I think it was harder for him, and there were more barriers, and it took longer, and so there was a little bit more going on. Whereas the brother he's sailing in through his gifted program. So I think today is great. Let's see here about, there were a lot of questions about this, about how to improve reading and writing in general, and how, especially about reading material. A lot of people were really concerned about what type of reading material they should be working with. And my answer to this, and it's a confident answer, is that content matters a lot less than consistency, and that the more time you spend reading any material, it is going to really dramatically increase your facility with language overall. And I can use myself as a kind of anecdote case that as a kid, if I love playing baseball, but if I was not playing baseball, I was reading compulsively. And I read constantly. And what's interesting is that my content often sort of landed on like horror fiction, which I'm not sure if I had a kid right now, I don't think I would want them reading Stephen King books and horror fiction, which is what I read a lot of, because it was entertaining to me. I thought I just enjoyed it. And it was the enjoyment that spurred me to have these compulsive reading habits. And what happened and what I noticed was that by the time I reached high school and I was done with grade 8, my facility with language was way past my peers. And it's not because I had diversified my reading content or I was carefully sort of designing a study schedule. It was a natural, organic commitment to constant reading itself that I did for fun. But it didn't matter what my end goal was or that I was enjoying myself while I was doing it. What mattered was that the sheer amount of reading I was doing was completely altering my ability to not even just in school, but I think just, you know, my writing skills, my critical thinking skills, you know, everything else like associated with like English type performance metrics. So when people are worried about content and suitable material, I think what's most important is that the student is finding material that they are motivated enough to read a lot of it and to keep going with it, rather than try and say, I'm going to design a specific diversified type of reading schedule or content. I don't think that needs to be the focus here. This is kind of a twin question that came up, was that people were worried about, this actually came in really quick right before the session. I just skipped one, I'll get back to the other one. Someone said if a ninth grader never learned the SAT reading an essay before, what do they need to do? Any book suggestions? And so in terms of the reading, not the essay, I would say focus on consistency, worry less about content, but that you absolutely have got to start reading more and reading daily. And that is the first step. As far as the essay, people, if you're worried about the essay and you haven't really jumped into the pool yet of preparation, just start with the fundamentals of rhetoric. Start with ethos, pathos, and logos. Get very comfortable with those key, just even those 3 terms, and use that as a foundation to start building your practice for when you do start to actually practice writing the essays. But just learning those 3 fundamentals of rhetoric is extremely helpful. I teach a lot of rhetoric courses. It's my favorite thing to teach, because as soon as you put that lens on, it can be reading material, it could be the news, it could be a movie you watch, it really transforms how you experience anything as an audience or as a reader. And so I think the key thing is to to start with the fundamentals of rhetoric. I had to talk about this question because it's a really great question, and it's a question we can't fully answer here because it's really a complicated one. So the question was this. Let's see. How do I make sure my writing is analysis instead of restatement of the author's point of view? This issue with analysis versus description is something that haunts everyone. And I even had a colleague who is a tenured professor who submitted an article, and the peer reviewers from the article from the journal came back and they said, you don't have an argument. So they were literally saying to them that you've done too much describing and summarizing. And obviously this person is brilliant. They're one of the top people in the field. So this is, like I said, this is a question we can't end this here. But I did want to give everyone this very simple, but it is profound, and it will always help you and save you when you're trying to do analysis in the SAT, the essay section. So the solution is this. Ask yourself why, it's why and how. Ask yourself why the author chooses a word or phrase and how it affects the audience in particular. If you focus on those two things, the why and the how, it will always save you. And I just wanted to give everyone, even quickly, this very simple example that I think will get this across to everyone. I was working with someone the other day on their essay section, and the student was summarizing these details. Sorry about that. The student was summarizing these details about how the author, this politician, was talking about nature conservation, and the politician was referring to young animals and infant animals repeatedly, and my student pointed it out, but just summarized it and said, Carter continually refers to young animals, and like paraphrased it and summarized it. And it was great that they had zeroed in on a particular detail, but they had not done the analysis that they're looking for when they grade you and they assess your essay. And so I just wrote a little sample here to show you the why and the how in action. And this is how we take the abstract concept of ask why, show how. This is how we do it. So politician focuses on infant animals, not just animals in general, to increase sympathy from the audience, the pathos. Showing the young helpless animals increases the likelihood that the audience will accept his message about nature conservation. And so that's what's so important from a rhetorical standpoint, is how does it affect the audience? It heightens their sympathy because the younger the animal is, the more helpless they are. And so the more helpless the animal seems, the more it's on the audience's burden to be the one who helps them. And by helping them, the politician had a message, you do X, Y, and Z to increase nature conservation. So that's like an example of how to put the why and the how in action. And that will always save you. You can take that free bit into all of your writing classes. If there are students out there watching and listening to it, I know there are, take that into every class and save your grade, save yourself. So yeah, that was another question that cropped up. So you know what? I think that was the bulk of it. I think I actually condensed. I got a list of questions, and I did condense some of them. They were a lot of them were about the reading material and the reading content. So that was it for the questions on the slides actually. Oh, there's Faye. Yeah. Hi, Faye.
Hi.
So yeah, thank you all so much for bearing with me and enjoying, listening to the lecture. I hope you can take those strategies and run with them.
Thank you. I will do the ending part.
Okay, thank you, Faye.
那对，就非常感谢大家，然后今天参加我们第103期的公开课，然后之后有任何问题呢，都可以在公开课的群里面，然后去询问我们，我们也会帮您转达给这个John Neiman 老师。然后接下来的第104期公开课呢，我们是邀请到了金老师、Dr. 严和 Sarah 安3位老师，共同为大家去做这个公开课。那公开课的主题呢是关于 SSAT 和 ISEE 这2个考试进行的。如果您的孩子呢最近就是正在面临这样的考试，或者说有关于这方面的问题，那就可以扫描我们的二维码，然后关注我们的公众号，然后另外说扫描一下二维码，然后报名参加一下我们下面的公开课。然后最后再次感谢今天所有参加我们公开课的家长、学生，祝大家周末愉快，然后母亲节快乐，拜拜。